Just hear those sleigh bells jingling, ring, ting, tingling too. Come on, it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride together with you. 'Cause outside the snow is falling.
Well, 'tis the season. Welcome, everybody, to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. You've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where here we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. You can follow us on Facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. You can follow me, send me messages during the show at Facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire. We also have a fan page, which we have brought back to life. That is Facebook.com/CRN. You can join us there. We have an app available for the Android platform. You can download that for free. I also have a blog page, cowgirlesquireblog.wordpress.com. I need to post that. We're going to be adding more to that in the very near future. And we have a telephone line, 717-467-1763. Unfortunately, we can only take one caller at a time. So when my guest, who will be Boyd Craven today, prolific Post-Apoc author extraordinaire, will be joining us to discuss the benefits of reading these books. Not only are they highly enjoyable, but they're very informative, especially if you're new to prepping. And in these books, they contain a lot of ethical dilemmas and things that you might want to consider before the time is actually upon us. So he'll be joining us in a few moments. I want to thank my friend Brian Duff over at Mind for Survival. He gave me an opportunity to participate in his very popular blog. And we shared our ideas for Christmas gifts for the preppers out there. And I think it's always fun to exchange gifts for the preparedness mindset. And if people are not really into it, you can give them something that will definitely be thought-provoking and hopefully get them into this hobby. I also want to thank Mike Church of the Veritas Radio Network. My show was on his network for about a year, and that was called The Suzanne Option. And I had sent him the article that 10th Amendment Center published about the Church of the National Government, and he discussed that in great detail yesterday. So it was really cool to hear him. He's really the one that got me interested in broadcasting in a serious manner, and so that was cool to hear him talking about that. And let's see, so today we're going to be discussing ethics of prepping and how to deal with people that are not prepared when Boyd joins us. But yesterday, Jeff, we didn't do our show yesterday. We're usually on live Monday mornings right after, I usually go right after your show, The Paradigm Shift. Jeff Johnson's producing me this morning, as always, and I will always ask him to chime in. Sometimes I catch him off guard, and it's kind of funny. But he usually has his shows Monday morning before me, The Paradigm Shift, and he also is live Sunday evenings with Daniel Bailey, the co-founder of the Cerberus Radio Network, on their show, The Renegade and the Rambler. So, Jeff, we weren't on yesterday. I had a kind of a big day here. My younger son got his braces out early in the morning because they take out the braces and then they make an impression in the mouth for a retainer. So we spent the day in Salt Lake City kicking around out there, and there are a lot of fun things to do. I think I told you a few weeks ago we went to the Natural History Museum. They have an amazing display about Vikings, and you know what I saw out there, Jeff, there was one display that had various bones from Vikings, and you could actually see how they had been killed. One had you could see an old wound from a sword. There were various other things you could see out there. They showed the beginnings of commerce for them with weights and measures and all sorts of cool stuff. But what we did yesterday was we went to the Leonardo Museum, and I have actually been there before, and we've seen exhibits such as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, if you want to find some inspiration, look at a tear out a piece of Leviticus or Exodus. I've also seen they have the display of the human body where they do some sort of plastic treatment, and you can see every part of the human body. I showed my boys, they had on display the difference of lungs between a smoker and a non-smoker, so it was really cool. And they also had a version for animals for that. Well, where am I going with this? Yesterday, we went there to hang out a little bit. They had a series on optical illusions and let's see, optical illusions and flight. And we got to see a C-130 they had in there, as well as an F-4 Phantom. But I also came across, oh yes, and of course, a women's rights display where they proudly touted the advancement of abortion, from California being the only state in the union that had it legal too. Of course, the much celebrated Roe v. Wade, so there's always that. Salt Lake City's pretty much a liberal pit, so you're going to have something like that. But I did come across something that I wanted to share with you, because recently, with all this debate of national reciprocity and me being taken to school by those who think that our system of federalism means that these states cannot infringe upon our rights, which are granted to us in the Second Amendment, Jeff, sometimes I feel like, like the little guys on Horton, here's a who. People just don't hear us. They're not getting the message. And I feel that it's going to be too late by the time this disastrous national reciprocity bill is passed. But we'll get to that later in the show. But before I bring Boyd on, I want to read to you a display they had up there. And this really resonated with me, because I feel like it's so hard to get our message out sometime. The good thing about technology being the way it is, people like me, people like you, we can have these abilities to reach people. The downside is so many people have the ability to do it. It's almost like we get tuned out because there are so many options. People just don't have the time. So it's just easier to put on the news, and Fox or MSNBC or CNN is on, and that's unfortunately where they get their information. But there's a poster board here, and it was called The Allegory. Picture a group of chained prisoners facing a wall who have lived in a cave all their lives. A fire roars behind them, and objects passing in front of this fire cast silhouettes against the wall. On the wall are the prisoner's reality, yet these shadows only represent another truer reality, the objects that cast them. Now suppose one prisoner is freed and turns around to see the fire and the objects casting shadows on the wall. Because he is accustomed to darkness, his eyes would strain at the brightness of the fire, but he would come to realize that the fire and the objects were the cause of his perception when he was chained. Suppose this prisoner wandered upward and out of the cave and into the real world and into the even brighter light of the sun. Again, his eyes would hurt in his new world, but he would come to learn that the objects of the cave only represented the real objects in the outside world, and that the sun was a greater source of light than the fire. Finally, the liberated prisoner, which Plato calls a philosopher, would feel obligated to his fellow prisoners because he understands their perception reflects less of the truth than the one he has recently learned. He descends back into the cave to free his fellow human beings and allow them to take their own journey to the sunlit world. Jeff, did that not hit home with you like it did me?
Oh yeah, the allegory of the cave is just awesome. It is not really talked about much today, but we are living it every day with this radio show, with our interaction with our friends and neighbors and the people we come in contact with. And I agree with you, at times it really does get frustrating. We seem to be beating our head against the proverbial wall when it comes to federalism. But when I was just down in Philadelphia, I told you guys the other night in that show that I talked to two guys, and at the beginning of it, they were extolling that there is national reciprocity was passed. The reasons why I disagreed with it, and the one guy goes, "I you know what? I never thought of that. I can see that. That makes sense to me."
Yeah.
So when you sit down with people face to face, the radio isn't face to face, but it's as close as we can get. And when you start explaining these things, people are listening. It maybe takes a little bit more time. One thing wrong with the social media is this media warriors. So a lot of these people, they're just there to be, contrary. They really don't care about learning something. They're just there to present their side, and you can just forget it, because they're right, you're wrong, and they're going to tell you how wrong you are.
Yeah, and the problem is so many of these people, again, and I don't mean to sound condescending like those that disagree with us are living in darkness and they're in the cave and they're unaware of their surroundings. But, you know, we are presented, and I refer to this as the trifecta of evil. They're the source of our information, or a more accurate word would be indoctrination. And they are the schools, our education system, the media, and the government. And the former two are run and controlled by licensing funding of the latter, the very government that they're supposed to be teaching the truth about, reporting honestly about. And that's why we don't see this happening. I have a quote I want to read to you from a friend of mine that posted on social media. And he says, "I don't have much hope for our country, but we just don't have the numbers to do anything about our socialist situation." And he's correct. We really don't right now. As it is right now, there are millions of us out there that have firearms, that are prepared to have that fight that we always talk about. And that's pretty much why we don't have this absolute gun confiscation that many of these politicians say that we should have. So they know if they can just let these veterans die off, if they can indoctrinate a new set in the military. For instance, I had a conversation with somebody who was flatly repudiating everything that the Second Amendment and the 10th Amendment mean, putting forth false history, and others were saying, well, he's a decorated war hero and a good guy. Well, that doesn't mean, you know, so this was a younger guy. So all they have to do is keep indoctrinating members of the military. It eventually, the ones from the, quote, greatest generation are going to be gone. We're going to have new generations of children that have been brought up exclusively in the public schools. And now what we see in the college campuses, I mean, it's all about social justice and not about personal responsibility, about morality, about common decency. It's about what you can get away with. They will not tolerate opinions to their own while touting their own virtues of being an inclusive population. So we see that. I'll try and get to an article also later, pro-Trump college students. They were wearing MAGA shirts and they were escorted out of a Safe Place coffee shop. So this is the tolerance that they will show to us, which is completely the opposite of what they demand from us. So also, we have others out there that are saying that state officials simply cannot disobey a federal judge, citing George Wallace and when he locked the doors in the college campus. What about a more recent example with Kim Davis? She did her job. She was the clerk in Kentucky in a county that said, or was it Arkansas? I think it was in Kentucky. The Kentucky Constitution was amended, ratified by the people of Kentucky to limit marriage to a man and a woman. In accordance with her oath to uphold the laws and the Constitution of her state, she did not issue marriage licenses to homosexual couples. She struck that state law down, and she was ordered to comply, and she was put in contempt of court. Now, what should have happened was the local sheriffs, the local community, state officials should have stood up between her and this federal government, the Leviathan, as we've referred to it before, and said, we're not going to allow you to lock up a member of our state system. She is upholding our law, not yours. That is federalism, but they cave every single time. So that's something I want to go into. And but first, what we'll do, we're not going to keep Boyd waiting, but we're going to revisit this after he's on. We were having a conversation, Jeff, on your show on Sunday night. We were talking about Christmas gifts, and one of the things I love to share as Christmas gifts are the gift of knowledge, also the gift of entertainment. And if you go to Amazon, you can find all sorts of these. I love the post-Apoc or apocalyptic genre because they provide such a source not only of entertainment and knowledge via the hypothetical situations and scenarios they present. So with that being said, is Boyd available on the line and ready to talk?
He is there. Boyd, are you still with us?
Hey, Boyd. Yes. All right. Well, let me introduce everybody to my very good friend, Boyd Craven. A while back, I saw a sponsored ad on Amazon, from Amazon on Facebook newsfeed. And it was about a book called Good Fences. And I couldn't help but notice the 5-star ratings. Everybody just raved about this book. So it was the first one in the post-apoc genre that I ever purchased, and I loved it. And I sent this guy I didn't know a private message on Facebook, and within a few minutes, he responded, and we became fast friends. In fact, for PrepperCon last year, he came out and stayed with me, and we hung out at their booth. There are a lot of great authors, and so I'm hoping he comes back out. So, Boyd, I'm going to shut up and just welcome you to the Wasatch Report. You were on my other show. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you two doing?
I'm doing well. Let's talk a little bit about these books. I don't know if you heard the beginning of the show, but Jeff and I were talking about how it really, how it feels to try and deal with people that have a notion of reality that is impressed upon them by those that don't have their best interests at heart, that want to keep them in the cave, so to speak, and seeing the illusions of shadows cast by their keepers as reality, and how that really affects all of us. So being prepared, I think, is a huge topic when we talk about stuff like this, because as we know, FEMA, for instance, advises people to keep 72 hours of food and supplies on stock. But boy, howdy, if you go past that, you might be labeled a domestic terrorist. So where do we draw the line in being ready and being practical? And your book, Good Fences, really brings up a scenario of a gentleman that was a prepper and was very ready to survive in a situation where the world as we know it changes, but because of encroachment and expansion of an urban area or suburban area, he had to live among people by common fence, hence the name, that were not ready. And the book presents a multitude of ethical issues. We'll get into the book. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into these issues that your book presents.
Well, a little bit about myself. This is the hardest part. I can talk about anything else but myself with ease, but I was a Boy Scout, and as a kid, we did a lot of our own canning and stuff like that. So the prepping mindset for me was kind of instilled at a very early age, but we just called it putting back for hard times. Later on in life, I decided to start writing about what I like to read. So that's when I kind of got into writing prepper fiction.
Well, and the funny thing is, just being ready, this was also a way of life. When you mentioned canning, I have a lot of friends from, say, West Virginia, and say, this is what my grandma did. They did this. This was part of their life. And I'm not going to give a spoiler for the book, but again, we have a character here who has a compound. He's got some land. He owns his own food, grows his own food, has, security plans in effect, but a planned community has come up around him, and it was a gated community. And these people now, we don't need to give away why the world changed around them, but they were left without the means to sustain themselves or even defend themselves. What are your thoughts on how to deal with somebody like this? Do you think, I forgot the main character's name, but do you feel like he handled it properly?
What I wanted to do was write about, you think you're in an ideal situation and you find out you're really not. And in this case, it's kind of reality for me. I live right on the edge of a big town, and there's a couple of farms by us, but other than that, the only way I can see, not having to bug out is being the guy that nobody can afford to lose. And that's the kind of character I wanted to make this guy.
That's a great way to look at it. So if you can be the guy that nobody can afford to lose, you might have something to offer, and people will turn to you for guidance. And I still think the bad guys are going to want to get at you just to get what they have. They're going to beat people out there that are only looking for themselves. But there's also a scenario that, how do you deal with people? And this is something that we need to have a plan about before it happens, because people like us, Boyd, I don't know, I'm sure you get it too. Well, you try and educate people as to the need to be prepared, and then they just have a quip, well, I'm just coming to your house when things go bad. You have your own family to prepare with. On your website, I think you say you have 1 million kids. So how do you feed 1 million kids, plus all the friends, family, and acquaintances, and everybody you ever met that says, I'll just come to your house? Do you turn them away? Do you have other food set aside for them? These are things we need to think about. There might not be an easy answer, but it's definitely something to take into consideration. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that completely. I mean, I've got the preps for my own family personally, but beyond that, you have to have an idea of a community plan too. In the situation I laid out in the book, the community sort of rallied together for mutual defense because, like I said, the one guy they couldn't afford to lose was the guy who was farming, who could put food in their bellies. They didn't know hunting and trapping. They didn't know food storage and food preservation techniques. They couldn't afford to lose this guy in the beginning, and they all rallied together to eventually help each other out. Their attitudes towards each other in the beginning of the book was vastly different. So
yeah,
that's kind of where I got the idea for the name.
And the twist in your book was you had a character who, his neighbor and the guy that started this development had a huge conflict in their personal lives, and they had to deal with it, and this gentleman's son. And when the rule of law is gone, these situations can be handled in either a productive way or a very unproductive way. And again, coming together, we talked about this, Jeff, you'll probably remember on my old show when Christopher was producing it. He lives in New Orleans, and his community had to get through Hurricane Katrina. They had, I think, 3 weeks without any power, and the community did come together, and they combined their efforts. So I try and tell people, come together as a community and everybody can have a set of skills or something. If you're lucky enough, for instance, to have a physician or a surgeon in your group, cut them some slack on food supplies and then have them help you when it comes to medical situations. So these are things. We also talked about gun confiscation during times of disaster, and that's also going to tie in the discussion we're going to have after we take our break on about national reciprocity. But Boyd, you present some really great in the book. It's also well written. It's a fast-paced book, and you have some other books as well. Why don't you just give them a shout and then let people know where they can find these books, how they can give them away. I think even on Amazon you can fill it out so you can send it right to somebody's email, and also your personal website.
Some of the books you can find that I've been writing is the Opus books. About a guy getting into prepping for the first time. The World Burns, which is kind of the series that started it all for me. Good Fences, the Devil Dog trilogy. I've got a lot. But you can find me on Amazon or my website at boydcraven.com.
One of the things also in these books is Rebel Radio. And it emphasizes the importance of ham radio. And Jeff, gosh darn it, I keep saying I'm going to get my license. And then if you get the general license, we can broadcast on shortwave radio and reach a lot more people. So that's something I want to do. So Boyd, I want to thank you for joining me. I've posted your contact information for your website and the books on Amazon on our page. We'll do that again. And are you coming out for PrepperCon this year?
That's what I'm trying to plan on.
Well, we hope to see you. Go ahead, Jeff.
It might be a trifecta because I'm hoping to make it out there this year as well. So it'll be Suzanne and me producing, and hopefully I'll get to meet you, Boyd. And I want to just I've read almost all your books. I haven't read the Opus series. I think I've read everything else, and I love all your books. And honestly, I started reading you. And then it just led to everyone else. I mean, I know if I named them all off, you'd know them all. And I've read so many of them. Mm-hmm. It's just, I just love the genre now. And I just want to kind of chime in what you said. The whole idea of prepping used to be a lone wolf thing. Today, and I've been preaching for a number of years now, community preparedness, because standing alone, it's going to take a community. If the worst happened, it's going to take a community to survive in those situations. Look at Katrina.
Yep, exactly.
I'm sorry, Suzanne. I didn't mean to take over your show.
No, that the timing was actually fortuitous because my internet went a little bit haywire for a minute. So I'm thinking, keep talking, Jeff. But you're absolutely right. So Boyd, we'll let you go. I know you got a million kids to take care of. I look forward to seeing you. By the way, hopefully my good friend Rick Barrett and I will have a book that will be ready for sale by PrepperCon. We have something in the works about disaster preparedness from our perspective. So we're excited about that. In fact, right after the show, he and I are going to get together and brainstorm on that idea. So Boyd, thank you for joining me. Jeff, why don't we cut to a break? I'm going to get myself organized. We're going to talk about some of the prognosticated pitfalls. I've already been right so far on HR 38, national reciprocity. This is the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. We'll be right back.
Just hear those sleigh bells jingling, ring, ting, tingling too. Come on, it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride together with you. 'Cause outside the snow is falling and friends
Well,
are
tis
calling.
the season. Welcome, everybody, to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. You've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where here we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. You can follow us on Facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. You can follow me, send me messages during the show at Facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire. We also have a fan page, which we have brought back to life. That is Facebook.com/CRN. You can join us there. We have an app available for the Android platform. You can download that for free. I also have a blog page, cowgirlesquireblog.wordpress.com. I need to post that. We're going to be adding more to that in the very near future. And we have a telephone line, 717-467-1763. Unfortunately, we can only take one caller at a time. So when my guest, who will be Boyd Craven today, prolific Post-Apoc author extraordinaire, will be joining us to discuss the benefits of reading these books. Not only are they highly enjoyable, but they're very informative, especially if you're new to prepping. And in these books, they contain a lot of ethical dilemmas and things that you might want to consider before the time is actually upon us. So he'll be joining us in a few moments. I want to thank my friend Brian Duff over at Mind for Survival. He gave me an opportunity to participate in his very popular blog. And we shared our ideas for Christmas gifts for the preppers out there. And I think it's always fun to exchange gifts for the preparedness mindset. And if people are not really into it, you can give them something that will definitely be thought-provoking and hopefully get them into this hobby. I also want to thank Mike Church of the Veritas Radio Network. My show was on his network for about a year, and that was called the Suzanne Option. And I had sent him the article that 10th Amendment Center published about the Church of the National Government, and he discussed that in great detail yesterday. So it was really cool to hear him. He's really the one that got me interested in broadcasting in a serious manner, and so that was cool to hear. To the images on the cave, I'm referring to the allegory of the sorry about that, the flames on the wall that are presented from the gatekeepers above. And people are just still convinced that federalism does not exist, or they want to cherry pick it and use it when it suits them. And this is something that we see on both sides. Now, if you are a conservative and you are up in arms, so to speak, and shouting from the rooftop your opposition to Obama's Affordable Care Act, yet you're singing the praises of the proposed National Reciprocity Act because now it's our turn and it's time to get something rammed down the throats of the states because it's good for us as conservatives to assert our Second Amendment rights. Problem. you're just as bad. And Jeff, this is where we kind of run into trouble and we lose a lot of people because they don't like to have these shadow images changed. They don't like to hear that the narrative that is so near and dear to them is a false one. And what they'll do is quote, and this is what I've seen on other pages, they will quote the Constitution as fact along with their deliberate misinterpretation of it, one of which I had posted exactly on my Facebook wall. I'm not even going to waste the time on quoting it. But there's an article from the Daily Caller from Bob Menendez, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, pillar of virtue, by out of New Jersey, who wants to throw people in prison. He says, throw them into prison for 5 years. He wants to do this for any out-of-state concealed carry permit who enters his state with a firearm. And Jeff, you mentioned earlier how convenient it is for this senator to all of a sudden find a fancy for the concept of federalism. He says, people violate our law. We are a state that has decided that we are against concealed carry weapons. We have stronger gun laws. We believe we have made the state safer. As that, he told the Daily Caller, excuse me, they violate our gun laws, then whatever is the law, they are found guilty of it. They should pay the consequences. So again, just like California, my former home state, the people of those states duly elect their representatives who, time and time again, enact such legislation, draconian gun laws, and then they run to the federal judiciary to seek relief with the assistance of the NRA. Thanks to Heller and the NRA's participation in that, we have now incorporated the Second Amendment in direct contravention to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as ratified against the states. Remember, in the Virginia plan, this never made it out the doors of the halls of Philadelphia. The Virginia plan proposed a national veto of state laws. So now Menendez wants his state laws upheld, and justifiably so. What he says is, I find it amazing that Republicans who believe in states' rights all of a sudden, remember now, I said this cuts both ways, who believe in states' rights all of a sudden have a problem observing the states' rights of those that think the stronger gun laws is the way to protect citizens. And that's what I have to say about it. So New Jersey, as we know, just like California, Illinois, New York, Maryland, has some of the most stringent gun laws in the country. Its state troopers are known to pull over drivers and question them on whether they are carrying concealed firearms. Now, Jeff, this is a reason I won't get a permit because, well, for in Utah, I can open carry without a permit. I anticipate that going away if national reciprocity is passed, but I'll get to that in a minute. And I had heard about a case where Brian Fletcher, I believe he was a North Carolina resident, and the article refers to him. He was arrested by New Jersey law enforcement in 2015 after he was pulled over and told police he had a handgun in his truck. And I've also heard situations where somebody is pulled over for a traffic violation and it will show up on the officer's computer that this person has been issued a concealed carry permit from an out-of-state licensing authority. And the case that I remember was this individual informed the officers that he was respecting the state laws as he was passing through, did not have a firearm in his vehicle, but they got the dogs and they took his car apart looking for the gun he said he never had. The justification for this search and the seizure, because he was stopped and held, was the fact that he had been issued a concealed carry permit from his home state. In 2013, Shanine Allen from Pennsylvania was arrested near Atlantic City after she told New Jersey law enforcement officers who pulled her over that she had a firearm that was considered legal in her home state. Chris Christie, who was the governor at the time, pardoned her, but the incoming Democratic mayor, Phil Murray, says that he will not be pursuing that policy of pardoning those. We might as well post a sign at the New Jersey border saying, "Welcome to New Jersey, you're under arrest," said Alexander Rubian. He's the president of the New Jersey Second Amendment Society. Now, here's the thing. These proponents of the Second Amendment and the people that say they want to protect the Second Amendment are actually tearing it down, because the Second Amendment is only valid if we respect the system of federalism. Remember, this is just a reiteration of Article 1, Section 8, where Congress is only granted the authority to arm the militia, but because of fears that they might, in fact, disarm the militia, they had the Second Amendment to keep the federal government out of firearm business, the business of regulating firearms, period. So what I have said, it's really interesting to me that people who have seen what the government can do so far, now all of a sudden, case in point, our health insurance, our education system, now seem to trust the government with our licensing system of concealed carry permits. So what I did was I posited a question to my followers on Facebook. What do you see as the possible pitfalls of this legislation? One of them I started the conversation off was, here's a look into our future. Due to an incoming hurricane, all residence permits in areas so-and-so, just fill in the blank, will have their CCW permits temporarily suspended. So I asked my followers to submit some other examples, and some of the stuff they came up with were things that, I hadn't even talked about yet. The first and foremost one, and I think is the most compelling argument, is wait until we have people in power who are against firearm rights, pre-existing rights from the beginning. People like Dianne Feinstein and these politicians who say that the Second Amendment confers a right, but rights, in the words of Hillary Clinton, for example, are subject to regulation. Restrictions on the government, however, if they view it that way, it's a non-starter. They have no authority to regulate this, but this is why they call them rights. So now they can regulate these rights. So what they'll do is say, due to the inconsistency of state standards for issuing and applying CCW permits, we're going to now have a national standard. It's going to be under the guise of uniformity. I heard this in law school all the time, where when we study case law as opposed to constitutional history, the opening case from the Supreme Court, when they issue a holding, due to inconsistency of state opinions, this case is ripe for review. Well, no, that case is ripe for you to mind your own damn business, because inconsistency of state opinions is the heart and soul of federalism. That is a government that was consented to. So what we've had is a constitutional convention that the states weren't invited to, turning us into a national situation, a nation, as opposed to a voluntary union. So instead of the issue being reserved for the states will have no rights whatsoever on this topic. Our good friend Scott Morris, he's actually the husband of Kate Morris, another one of our post-Apoc genre friends, and I like her books as well. We'll have to get her out. She was out for PrepperCon as well, so hopefully you can meet her in the spring, Jeff. Health costs are too high because of gun crime, so concealed carry holders will have to pay a higher premium. Now, Jeff, think about this. How many times, and I had this happen in California, people talk about this all the time, when your doctors ask if you have guns in the house. Now, with the federalization of healthcare and the requirement that doctors maintain electronic records, everything you're saying to your doctor, have you ever noticed they're writing everything down? Well, what used to be personal notes that your doctor would put in your file, and they'd put this paper file away in their office, now goes to this electronic storage area that the government can access, including the IRS, including maybe BAFTE. So there's going to be a link. And let's see, what else? Here's another one. Here's what I see happening. David King, who's running for office in Alabama. By the way, I'm hoping Roy Moore wins today. But I'm in Utah, so it really shouldn't be any of my business. Here's what I see happening. In order to make uniform reciprocity, the most stringent requirements will be forced on all states. So whoever has the hardest, most invasive testing, backgrounds, fees, schooling, etc., In order for the citizens to get concealed carry, that will be the standards. And this is what I have said too. You can expect California, New Jersey, New York's standards nationwide. Pardon my use of the N-word, but that's what we're going to have. And this is, I want to thank William for saying, this is why she's such a winner, a rare gem she is. There aren't enough like her that understand originalism. You know, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, Jeff, but gosh darn it, it's nice to hear that sometime, because the other day, one of the comments from someone I didn't even know, you're either stupid or mentally deficient or something like that. These attacks, referring to the people that are coming out from the cave and seeing the bright light for the first time, it hurts their eyes. They don't want to hear it, and they're going to get angry. They're going to get hostile. A lot of people do come around, and they understand it if they want to stick around and learn a bit of the history. All the information is out there. And it is scary that any crisis can be used by the government. Fires, tornadoes, earthquakes, Antifa protests, NRA conventions, massive flooding. It goes on and on. I had to put NRA on the list since the National Reciprocity Bill may just bite them in the rear. And this is one I feel the NRA missed the boat on by ignoring how politics really work. Wait until the liberals are back in power. And the thing is, Jeff, if this wins, this is going to be job security in perpetuity for the NRA, because now as we get more and more restrictive policies on the licenses, these guys are going to be going to court in perpetuity. The phones are going to be ringing. Oh, there's a new challenge to your concealed carry gun rights across our nation's state borders. Apparently, the states are just counties now, and they're subservient to the whole. And again, that benefits the NRA. It benefits the national government. It benefits everybody, but we, the people. Another one, Dennis Wilson, due to election results, due to X University winning a championship, due to the verdict in the case of any time we have an issue of possible unrest, or you name your calamity, we can have a decree from a federal government that will send us a warning, possibly through our smartphones, saying, do not leave your home with your firearm. Just like we get national alerts or Amber alerts on our phones, FEMA alerts, warnings on our phones, we could get a notice that if you own a firearm, you can't leave your home with it, because we have a problem and we need to keep everybody safe. So we're seeing stuff like this. And this is another thing. Imagine we have like laws in California where you can't have a firearm within, I think, 1,000 feet of a school. Well, in 1990, the federal government came up with the Gun-Free School Zones Act that banned possession of handguns near schools. And the judicial temple monkeys said that this was unconstitutional because it did not have, and this is how crazy the legislators are. They justified this by, and I studied this in law school, by citing the Commerce Clause. And this makes Wickard versus Filburn look like it almost makes sense. So here is the rationale. If children are in school and they are afraid of firearms in their vicinity within apparently 1,000 feet, because I think it was 1,000 feet, they're going to feel safe. If you have firearms near the school, children will be so afraid that they cannot learn. If we're going to crank out uneducated children, that's going to eventually affect interstate commerce and our economy. This is what they came up with. And even the Supreme Court didn't agree with them. So they said it was unconstitutional, not because there was no constitutional authority pursuant to the Second Amendment to even come up with this asinine regulation, but because it did not have a substantial impact on interstate commerce. So the very people that we supposedly trust to interpret this Constitution don't even understand it themselves. So this is why they just need to be out of that business entirely. And this is why federalism is the answer. A respect for our representative system of government. If we go to this national system, we have one representative for approximately 785,000 people. Do you really think your representative, if you write them a letter in the House of Representatives, your congressman is even going to see the letter that you write to them? Our good friend Mark Kreslins was a senior legislative assistant, and he told us, no, they never see it. They have their little minions just sending out form letters with a stamped signature. So you're not going to get the representation that you need. And again, so now what they'll do, going back to the Lopez case and the Gun-Free Zone Schools Act, which required, again, what we call commandeering, which is utilizing state resources to enforce a federal law as well. What they'll do now is say, well, as part of your concealed carry permit, now that we have given ourselves the authority with the blessing of gun rights advocates and the NRA, now we're going to have some common sense regulations about where all you people with your hidden guns may go. Oh, by the way, you can't go near schools. Well, guess what? We're back to Lopez. We're back to the Gun-Free Zone Schools Act by judicial decree, and because the national reciprocity will be sent to the Supreme Court to be fixed. I had Charles Heller when I debated him on my show. He's on a show in Arizona. They all look to the Supreme Court to put the fixes into this laws. What is representative? About 5, because it's usually by 1, and it really comes down to 1, actually, justice ruling on a side of law that affects over 320 million people. A justice, by the way, who is unaccountable, not subject to re-election or dismissal. They should be, but they're not. They're not subject to dismissal. There's nothing representative about this. Yet people think because our guys are putting this forth, this is our time to have something good. And my prognostications of the pitfalls are already coming through, and the law hasn't even, or the bill hasn't even been signed into law yet. What did the Democrats do? They attached more gun laws to it. So it's going to be interesting to see if it passes. Massey, who's supposed to be an originalist, is supporting this, and it just mystifies me, Jeff, how people are willfully ignorant and willing to cherry pick federalism when it suits them. And if you do this, you are just as culpable of destroying our constitutional representative republic as the progressives are. Did you want to chime in a little bit on that, Jeff?
Well, like I said during our discussion before the show, I was really just kind of observing how Menendez all of a sudden has just figured out federalism. When it comes to the EPA ruling our lives, or the BLM ruling ranchers' lives in the West, or down to the ACA and government forcing us to buy a product that some people don't want to buy. They have no problem with a top-down socialist Marxist government, but when it suits their purpose to deny people their natural right, because we're not talking about Second Amendment right, we're talking about natural right, excuse me, they will invoke federalism because that way they can stop the natural right from being exercised in their state. And honestly, he's right. If New Jersey wants to be that way, here's the deal. If New Jersey wants to stink, and they're a big tourist state because of their many, many miles of white sandy beaches, if people says of this, all of a sudden the pocketbook is going to get really hurt in New Jersey, and people will vote with their pocketbook, and they can go to North Carolina and go on their white sandy beaches, or South Carolina on their white sandy beaches, or Florida, or any of the others that are going to allow them to carry their concealed firearm on their permit by an agreement between the states.
Well, and that's exactly right. People refer to the driver's licenses all the time. And when Charles Heller kept mentioning that when I debated him, by the way, he at first said he was going to want to come back and debate me again. And then I guess when he got the feedback, he ended up blocking and won't discuss it further. But here's the thing. There is no federal decree mandating that states respect each other's licenses. And in fact, the respect of the out-of-state license only goes so far as to allow, for instance, when I moved to Utah, I had to get a Utah license. I couldn't just keep my California license. Plus, Jeff, do you know how good it is to have a driver's license or license plates that don't say California? It was fantastic. But they seem to forget that. And also, they cite full faith and credit. And again, full faith and credit was really so individuals could have own property. They would have basic rights of United States citizenship respected across state lines. To say full faith and credit justifies CCWs being respected and renders all state licensing systems irrelevant or superfluous. I have a license to practice law in the state of California. I cannot show up in a court of law in the state of Utah and demand privileges to what they call pass the bar, approach the bench and practice law. So why don't we have national reciprocity for medical licenses? Why don't we have national reciprocity for hunting licenses, contractors' licenses, beauty licenses to cut hair, to do nails? I mean, you name it. There's a reason, because each state has its standards. So why don't we have those? But why do we have it for national reciprocity? Because we have political organizations who make millions of dollars promoting this policy. So it's self-serving. It perpetuates their existence, their fat paychecks that they get from this. I have zero respect for the NRA. I once used to think they were outstanding, but I see now what they've done is actually mitigating our pre-existing rights to defend ourselves with firearms. And Jeff, I do consider that a natural right. We had a discussion recently, we saw that, about natural versus civic rights. Civic rights, as we know, are imposed upon government. And if you argue that we're no longer in a natural state, we have no natural rights. But we have to revert to the Lockean principles that we do have a natural right to be governed by a system of which we consented to. So if the government that is now ruling us is no longer performing its function, which really should be the proper role of government, would be defending our liberties and vanguarding our liberties, then we, going back, these principles harkening back to the Declaration of Independence, which in turn goes back to natural law, have a right to replace the government with one that does represent us. And this is what people are forgetting. We have these rights notwithstanding the fact that we are part of civic society. And I know you had wanted to chime in on that a little on your show. Why don't we wrap the show up with your thoughts on that, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do tomorrow or when we're on next.
All right. Well, there was a post on Facebook that kind of got all of our attention. And I'm not going to say who it was from, because that's really not important. What's important was the concept being discussed, because it was asserted that we don't have a natural right because we don't live in a natural world. Well, and that everything we have is a civil right because we have a civil society. Well, that is how we ended up where we are today with Roe v. Wade, government bestowing a civil right where there was no natural right to murder babies. So now the government is bestowing a right to murder the soon-to-be-born human being in contravention to that human being's natural right to life. So, and speaking, that's also how we end up with. That's also how we end up with gay marriage being forced on states that have stating that man and a woman. And that is the natural order set up by our creator, that marriage is between a man and a woman. Now, so now we have a civil right overriding the natural order. So my statement was in this conversation was, okay, so Jefferson had it all wrong. There was no such thing as natural rights. He was creating civil rights, and I just said, I just wasn't having any of it. And I said, listen, this is a college created course to remove God from the equation and replace it with humanism, which is the worship of man. So that's where this all came from, is the fact that we have people that are trying to replace God with humanism and natural rights. So
Well,
I'll let you get going on that.
My question also is what about my right to life? And the comment was, well, that is a civil right, civic right. Well, gosh darn it. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a Twilight Zone episode that Mark Kreslin had posted, and it's called You Have Become Obsolete. And I shared that the other day. And this was a gentleman who was a librarian, and he was put forth before a tribunal who, representing the government, declared him an obsolete member of society and was going to be executed. They granted him the liberty to decide his means of execution and the time, as long as it was within 48 hours. But if that sounds a little out there to you, think about now how the general government is viewing healthcare, how insurance companies are deciding who gets treatment, who doesn't. Sarah Palin was mocked for mentioning death panels, but that's exactly what we have. And Cass, I forgot who it was. I think it was Rahm Emanuel's brother, when the ACA was being debated. He had mentioned, I think they dug up a paper that he had written. Yes, I know he wasn't a legislator, but this is representative of the mindset of these people, calling the allocation of healthcare units. So what do we have? We have the very young not being worthy maybe of extraordinary care because they have not had a chance to contribute much to society yet. Parents haven't really invested in them as much. We're also going to be units not worthy of heroic care, be inexpensive care. Really, let's get down to it. It is a matter of money because their usefulness has waned, and we're not going to get much out of them, so let's not put much into preserving their lives. The workers, however, those of working age, those that can be productive, those are the ones we want to put our money into because we need their efforts to contribute capital to the funding of what? The funding of government. It's really quite easy. I remember, I forgot who I want to try and find this link, but there was a guy saying that we really need these kids in schools and the education system so they can grow up and be productive taxpayers. Here, and that's really what we are, Jeff. I'm bovine 30-06. We're born, we get those Social Security numbers, we get our numbers, and they will track us for the rest of our lives. And it's not coincidental that whenever we are setting up a medical file that we have to provide our Social Security numbers. It's not just a matter so that insurance companies can track us. I mean, they could come up with another means by which to keep track of our files and the medical care we've received, but it's a Social Security number tied directly into the government, also now with the IRS. And that's how they track us no matter what we do. And we need to be aware of what their ultimate goal is. And this is another thing, Jeff, I talk about. We're going to have to get into the Agenda 21 series that we were talking about, because one of the UNESCO Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 30, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, seeks to take over our sovereignty in favor of a one world entity. One of the means by which they intend to do this is the destruction of the traditional family unit. And how do they do that? Well, let's get these kids in the government schools. Let's get the moms in the workplace. Let's get these people so in debt that they're going to always be struggling to have a lifestyle. But guess what? The schools, the government, we're going to educate these children. So we see these institutionalized learning centers that are really warehouses while the parents pursue the almighty dollar, a significant percent of which goes to the almighty government, which is our national church by now. So I'm thinking that I hear the music. We're about out of time. I want to thank everybody. Jeff, we're going to be revisiting that Agenda 21 now, Agenda 30. the goals of UNESCO. As I mentioned before, UNESCO and the ownership of land such as Bears Ears National Monument out here in Utah, these people think that it is UNESCO that should be owning these sites. That is the United Nations organization owning land in our sovereign territory. So wake up, everybody. Get out of the cave. Freedom, your liberty, our very preservation depends on that. I'm Suzanne Sherman. This has been the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network. Thank you, Jeff, for joining me here. We try to defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. God bless.
They're gonna build a toyland town all around the Christmas tree.
You better watch out.
You better not cry.
You better not pout.
I'm a telling you why.
Santa Claus is coming to town.